Okay, let's get started. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Paul Chandler, and I am Director of Stewardship at the PRI. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this afternoon's breakout session on nature stewardship navigating the ecosystem. As many of you know, there are many new initiatives in this space. We set this session up to tackle this issue, this question head on. We have the luxury of a full hour with you all today to talk through both PRI's new initiative, Spring, as well as various other industry initiatives focused on engaging companies and policymakers on the topic of nature and biodiversity loss. Before we get into the session, first I wanted to do a bit of scene setting. The growth in nature initiatives on the responsible investor side reflects a rapidly growing understanding in our world and the world more broadly that we are not on track where it comes to nature loss, biodiversity, and net zero. We may be encouraged by increasing momentum and high-level commitments, notably the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, but we continue to hear sobering news about the physical state of the climate and the natural world. A recent study in Nature Sustainability pointed to the fact that the collapse of ecosystems is likely to happen sooner rather than later. This is due to a combination of human interventions and climate change. We are not even close to stopping global deforestation. According to the World Resources Institute, 2022 was the year with the third highest annual deforestation rate this millennium and was a 10% increase on the year before. Unless we systematically decouple our global economy from nature destruction and forest loss, we will not reduce rates to sustainable levels, let alone meet our targets of fully halting and reversing forest loss by 2030. Our global economy continues to depend on resources whose extraction and processing pose imminent threats to our natural world. Not just industrial agriculture, but also the decarbonisation of energy and the supply chains needed for that is putting pressure through mining, where we see a projected six-fold need for minerals for the clean energy transition that often put pressure on the same biodiversity ecosystems that we are trying to protect. And as we heard this morning, we cannot solve net zero, we cannot address nature loss unless we are working on climate, and we cannot address nature loss unless we're working on nature loss. We know that this is a significant system-level risk to the bottom lines of individual companies, the long-term value of investment portfolios, and the overall health of the global economy. Nature and biodiversity loss is the ultimate systemic risk. These are not risks that can be diversified away from. And as we know from the legal framework for impact work produced by the law firm Freshfields, investors have an obligation to consider and work towards acting on such systemic issues that are instrumental to overall investment performance, as we know is the case in this instance. Stewardship is a key tool to do exactly that. Risks can be addressed by investors through engagement with companies and policymakers in a constructive manner in order to push to decouple the global economy from biodiversity loss. This is why we at the PRI are developing Spring. And if I had my clicker, there we go. Wonderful. So Spring is PRI's new collaborative initiative for nature. As we discussed in the plenary this morning, today marks a landmark moment for the launch of Spring. We released today our investor statement, setting out the need for investor action, the urgency of action, and the need for further investor and company action on this topic. The statement sets out our high-level expectations to companies that will be engaged through the initiative. And within that, the statement puts a particular emphasis on responsible political engagement. So the lobbying and the other forms of corporate political influence that are potentially a barrier to progress on nature loss and biodiversity loss. Spring will ask companies to commit to align their business operations and strategies to the global biodiversity framework, to adopt and implement policies and responsible sourcing policies to address the risk of deforestation and other adverse nature impacts in their supply chains, and adopt responsible and transparent political engagement activities, ensuring that all lobbying, including that but done by third parties, is working towards the global biodiversity framework goals. Spring will commence fully in early 2024, and we are currently in the process of selecting focus companies for the initiative. The focus companies will be selected based on their role, their influence over key policy arenas, both in producer countries as well as consumer countries. Once we've released our company list, we expect to recruit an investor working group made up of our signatories who will be working to engage with companies on this important topic. As we're designing the strategy for this initiative, we are working in regular intensive dialogue with our friends and partners at other initiatives, many of whom we'll hear from in a moment, including Nature Action 100+ and other key initiatives on this topic. We recognize that all of these initiatives bring value to investors and to the broader drive to a sustainable future. With our emphasis on key geographies, forest loss and land degradation, and particularly the political engagement, the lobbying and political influence of companies, we have sought to actively distinguish and ensure our initiative brings additionality to the nature space. In Climate Action 100+, we have 5 investor networks working together to coordinate one initiative, but within that, there are still 5 investor working groups. And supplementing Climate Action 100+ are many smaller engagements, such as Climate Engagement Canada or Green, focused on the real estate sector. The nature space is a different puzzle, but it is still a puzzle that comes together. Initiatives sit slightly differently, but all of them are working towards the same ultimate objective, and that's what we're here to talk to you about today. You'll hear from the secretariats of other initiatives in a moment, and then later in the session from a panel of investors who will talk through how they see these initiatives fitting together in their work. We encourage all of you to listen and join the initiatives that most make sense for your organization, and not to feel that you need to choose one over the other. To illustrate this point, as I said, we're going to be hearing from a number of initiatives, and to do that and to welcome you to the session as well, I'll introduce my colleague Tim Steinweg, who has recently joined the PRI Stewardship Initiatives team to lead our work on Spring. Tim will be our moderator for the session today and will also introduce all of our other speakers. So Tim, I'll hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paul, and thanks everyone for taking the time and attending this breakout session. Really excited about it. I'll be your moderator for today. And as Paul mentioned, and as was also alluded to in the plenary session this morning, there really is a very large variety of different stewardship initiatives that touch on various topics within the nature realm. And while, you know, it's truly an ecosystem, and while the diversity may not be as big as the world's flora and fauna is, we still do recognize that this may be a confusing space. It may be seen as overly complex. And that's really the objective of the session this afternoon, is to try to make sense of this all. So we're going to do that by having, starting off, as Paul mentioned, really a rapid fire introduction of a number of initiatives, followed by a panel discussion of investors who will reflect from their perspective on the added value of these various initiatives. So you will hear in order, either through in-person presentations or through pre-recorded video statements. Today from Nature Action 100, from the Investor Policy Dialogue on Deforestation, from the FAIRR initiative, from the Finance Sector Deforestation Action Initiative, FSDA, and from the Asian Investor Group on Climate Change. And to further add a level of complexity, this is only a selection. There are many, many more smaller or more thematic initiatives out there that we do recognize exist on a range of different nature-related topics, thinking of leather, thinking of seafood, thinking of chemicals. So this is really a snapshot of some of the initiatives. But just wanted to acknowledge there are many more. So let's spring into action and kick it off with our first pitch. And for that is Peter Taylor to introduce Nature Action 100. Peter.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Paul, for giving me the opportunity to say a few words about Nature Action 100 this afternoon. I'm Peter Taylor from IIGCC. So I'm going to answer 3 questions very quickly: the what, the who, and the how. So the what. Nature Action 100 is a global collaborative engagement initiative bringing together institutional investors from across the world and companies from across the world to address nature risks and indeed opportunities. It is inspired by, but distinct from, Climate Action 100. So the who. Firstly, who is facilitating this? The 4 partners behind this are Ceres and ourselves at IIGCC, forming the Secretariat and facilitating the engagement work stream, while Planet Tracker and Finance for Biodiversity Foundation are leading the technical advisory group. But more important than the 4 partners are the 190 institutional investors from across the world, asset owners, asset managers, big, small, and crucially, from every region in the world. And lastly, but certainly not leastly, in fact, most importantly, the 100 companies. The 100 companies are 100 companies selected on a basis of a number of criteria, including exposure to coming from the 8 high-impact nature and biodiversity sectors from every geography, and crucially, including approximately 25 companies from the Asian region, and that obviously includes Japan as well. So lastly, the how. The first step, which commenced 2 weeks ago, was that those 190 investors sent letters to the 100 companies outlining 6 asks, the investor expectations of companies on nature, risk, and biodiversity, addressing 6 asks such as assessments of nature risk by those companies, implementation plans, and targets. The next step is for those 190 investors to form into small engagement teams for each of those 100 companies, so that every one of those 100 companies has 3 or 4 investors that are directly engaging with those 100 companies. So that, in a nutshell, is Nature Action 100. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Peter. Fantastic timing, too. Next up is the Investor Policy Dialogue for Deforestation. They have a pre-recorded video.
Hi, my name is Rafael Ferreté. I'm a finance sector engagement specialist with the Tropical Forest Alliance, an initiative hosted by the World Economic Forum. We host a secretariat for the Investor Policy Dialogue on Deforestation, a collaborative investor initiative set up in 2020 to engage with public agencies and industry associations in specific countries on the issue of deforestation. The IPDD currently has 78 members representing 20 different countries, and together they have over $10 trillion in assets under management. The Secretariat support is provided by the TFA, and the initiative is supported by the PRI. IPDD's goal is to coordinate a public policy dialogue on halting deforestation. Investors seek to ensure long-term financial sustainability of investments in the countries they are invested in by engaging with country authorities at either the national or subnational level, and with other relevant stakeholders. The initiative consists of 3 working groups focused on both producing and consumer countries. These are IPDD Brazil, IPDD Indonesia, and IPDD consumer countries, the latter of which focuses on United States, United Kingdom, and the European Union. The initiative offers a unique collective engagement model between investors and sovereigns. Different investor types and asset classes come together on the topic of deforestation. Investors recognize that there is no one-size-fits-all approach and adapt the dialogue for each geography they engage in. No matter the country, mutual respect, benefit, and trust form the basis of IPDD's dialogue. All IPDD engagements are conducted behind closed doors, prioritizing open dialogue with policymakers and sovereigns. Capacity building and knowledge sharing are also key pillars of IPDD, with investors learning from stakeholders and sharing knowledge amongst themselves. Collaboration and dialogue are the drivers of the IPDD. If you want to learn more about this initiative, please read our progress report published in December 2022. Thank you.
That was number 2. Number 3 is Max Boucher of the FAIRR initiative.
Hello, everyone. So the FAIRR initiative has a core mission of driving sustainability in the food sector, including agriculture and meat and dairy, by empowering investors to make better decisions and to better engage and more meaningfully engage companies within their portfolios. And when you think about nature risk, agriculture is up there. We know the facts, we know the figures about deforestation, land use change, pollution, invasive species, and so on. But on the flip side, agriculture is also part of nature and is also an important sector to deliver nature-based solutions, whether it's carbon sequestrations, working towards climate, or improving biodiversity, and so on. But even then, companies are too slow to act. And we've just proven that in a paper that we released a couple weeks ago on regenerative agriculture, where we found that most companies talk about it, but don't actually do very much about it. And so we help investors understand the financial materiality of nature and various other factors. And we also help them integrate them to their investment processes. But we help them understand really in depth the exposure of companies to these risks, but very importantly also how the companies respond to these risks. And finally, the last thing that I'll say is that we help investors engage either on their own or as part of the coalition on these risks and opportunities. And we always do this in a way that aims to align and collaborate with other initiatives out there, whether it's Nature Action 100 and others, and fill gaps that we see in investor action and attention to these risks. And a good example of that, I think, is oceans and fisheries that receive a bit less attention than other risk drivers of nature-related risk. And as part of our action on that, we've partnered with 4 other NGOs, WWF, UNEP-FI, Planet Tracker, World Benchmarking Alliance, to engage 7 companies that either directly control or heavily influence fisheries throughout the world to actually not change what they are doing, but to implement the commitments that they have already made on traceability of fisheries. So there are many more other engagements and activities that we do, and I invite you to speak to myself or my colleagues throughout the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. Next up, another pre-recorded video from the FSDA, or the Finance Sector Deforestation Action Initiative.
To tackle deforestation is an essential part of the fiduciary duty of any financial institutions, even more on the financial institutions of the global south. It's not a question of if you want to or if you don't want to, it's a question of obligation. So if you want to be really essential, a driving force for the next chapter of the green economy, we need to embrace initiatives such as FSDA and to engage collectively to make a real change on the way we produce commodities and the way we feed the world, without deforestation and with purpose.
At Stewardship Asset Management, we've been working on deforestation for many years. Joining initiatives such as FSDA has allowed us to work in a more efficient and systemic way. First of all, we have created a common set of expectations, which also companies appreciate that we're able to speak with one voice. Secondly, it's bringing investors from north and south and allows us to tackle the whole ecosystem of companies, from soy producers in Brazil to the farming industry in Norway.
And then last but not least, Monica Bay for the Asian Investor Group on Climate Change.
Thank you very much. Today, I am going to introduce not an initiative, a work stream that we're doing at AIGCC called Forest and Land Use. And this really is bringing in the deforestation and land use conversion into the conversation of climate change. So for any investors who are looking into climate change, really needs to look into the issue of deforestation and land use. And this is also a gateway towards nature and biodiversity. So why is it so important for Asia? I would say Asia is part of a large problem globally, but also provides some of the solutions as well. So I kind of explained the importance of Asia with number 3. So Asia represents a third of global emissions relevant to the agriculture, forestry, and other land use sector. Also, you have to acknowledge the uniqueness of Asia, where a lot of developing economies are. So emissions are going to go up. And if you look at this past 3 decades, it has gone up about 30%. So the projection of Asia, it is going to grow. But also it provides a potential solution for about a third of nature-based solutions as well. So this is why one of the most important areas why we are focusing with investors based in Asia, with the focus of the Asian region as well. And what we're trying to do is navigate for all investors to have an assessment, a risk exposure assessment in the investments with a policy. So it's embedded into the investment policies, and also nature as a mainstream asset class. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Well, I hope you enjoyed this whirlwind of initiatives, this tornado of presentations. You're also more than welcome to come up with your own nature-related analogy of this format. And this all may make a lot of sense to us at the various secretariats, but does it make sense to investors? Does it make sense to you? And this is going to be the focus of our panel discussion now. So we're going to invite a number of investors up on stage to really reflect on how they look at this ecosystem, how they look at this diversity of initiatives, what drives their participation in multiple projects, and how does it fit within their strategies and their mandates. So at the end of the panel, there will be a Q&A section. We're not having a quiz on the previous panel, but you are welcome to use the PRI in-person app and the Q&A function. Make sure to select the right breakout room, and then we'll have a few minutes to address some of your questions. So with that, I would like to invite on the stage Laura Bosch Ferreté, Sustainable Investing Specialist at Robeco, Dai Yamawaki, ESG Investment Manager at Nomura Asset Management, and Nina Roth, Head of Active Ownership Colombia Threadneedle, making her second appearance of the day. So thanks so much for taking the time and being willing to reflect on all of this with us today. But let me ask a broader question to kick us off. So obviously we're talking about stewardship. Stewardship is one component of an overall strategy to address nature risk. Can you elaborate a little bit on how this work fits within that wider strategy? Laura, let me start with you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tim, for inviting us for today's session. So at Robeco, we've actually been working on the topic of biodiversity for a number of years. So almost a decade ago, we started engaging on the topic of palm oil and deforestation linked to that industry. And later on, we started to integrate nature-related topics in our sustainability research, which we use for investment analysis. But it was back in 2020 when we actually made a couple of important commitments on biodiversity. We joined the Finance for Biodiversity Pledge, where we publicly committed to start mapping and minimizing the biodiversity footprint of our investments. And we also joined the COP26 commitment on eliminating agricultural-driven deforestation from our investments. So those two commitments actually pushed biodiversity into our sustainable investing agenda, and it became a key strategic focus area for us. So we set up a biodiversity committee and really rolled out a roadmap on how we're going to achieve those targets. And stewardship actually played a very important role in how we're going to work towards those objectives. So on the engagement side, we developed a multi-layered approach, engaging with corporates, expanding our work in that front, but also engaging with policymakers and trying to create a level playing field in key economies. So for that, we actually joined several collaborative initiatives that were working on that direction. So we are an active member of Nature Action 100 and also the Investor Policy Dialogue on Deforestation, where we chair the working group on the dialogues with Indonesia. But beyond all the engagement work, we've also been integrated biodiversity into our voting policy. So we're really trying to advance the agenda within the organization and leveraging all these wide range of initiatives that are available in the market to further amplify our leverage.
Great. Yeah.
Super. I go next, I mean, it is very similar, and they're like a little different, of course. So we start from the premises that it absolutely makes sense from a financial perspective to engage on the topic of biodiversity and nature risk, nature loss, because the companies we invest in on behalf of our clients are exposed to and depend on ecosystems and ecosystem services. So if these ecosystems fail, the companies we invest in fail and are not viable to invest anymore. So clearly there is a reason and an incentive for us to engage with them and improve their performance on these topics. This is reflected in our active ownership strategy, which focuses on engagement on equities and corporate fixed income, supplemented with some public policy engagement. We have various themes that we cover in our engagement. If you joined the session just before on human rights, you know some of them already. But for this topic, the direct themes are climate change and environmental stewardship. And under environmental stewardship, we have the biodiversity topic. But then there are obviously other themes indirectly linking or even directly linking to the topic, like public health, with like increased likelihood of pandemics, for example, that are linked to nature loss. There is the labor and human rights aspect for indigenous people's rights being particularly affected by nature loss, but then also, of course, the overarching governance theme with the oversight responsibility of boards with like implementing biodiversity strategies in companies. Efforts and operations. We do prioritize in a way that we have used or incorporated elements of the Encore tool, where we have identified sector-level dependencies, but then also sector-level impacts on certain ecosystems and engage on the back of that. So key focus areas on that then link to industries like food and beverages, utilities and materials. So that's a core focus area, or these are core focus industries that we engage on these topics. And then we have an additional engagement program that runs over several years, where we look at biodiversity across commodity supply chains, including their financiers, so everyone along the supply chain, and then who's financing them, each individual, and how they're incorporating deforestation risks. Apart from that, and we also include biodiversity in our voting, proxy voting strategy. It's at a level where we focus on disclosure. So companies that haven't disclosed against CDP climate, CDP forest, CDP water, they would automatically land on a suggested vote against management policy, and we would choose to vote against certain directors. We do engage, as mentioned before, on a one-on-one basis, but also substantially collaboratively. So around 30% of our total engagement is collaborating with other investors and other stakeholders. The majority of these collaborations are actually coming from the environmental and climate side. So Nature Action 100, we work with Asia Research and Engagement on the energy transition. We work with FAIRR, IIGCC on the bank side, addressing these topics. ChemSec, Sarah's working group on land use, the investor policy dialogue that we heard, and also work on an automotive value chain engagement, where actually like raw material is then used in that.
Okay. Yeah, actually, I want to start answering your first questions. So with our company's overall policies on natures, actually, Nomura Asset Management started our ESG statement since 2019, and already we have devised twice this statement. However, nature itself has been set actually very important topic from the beginning. So at the same time, nature has been set as one of very important topics for our engagement activity as well. So out of 9 topics like climate change, human risk, and also capital efficiencies. So that is under this umbrella, we're actually encouraging companies to take necessary actions, especially for nature-related risk. And also, so that is why I think our statement, and our work is really in line with our new initiative on Spring, and which is really, how can I say, convening global investors to use voice and also influence on these issues. So that's all.
Fantastic, thanks so much. I think this really clarifies sort of how this is a piece of the puzzle, and I think this analogy really works in multiple ways, because there are all these different initiatives, right? So Dai, let me follow up with a question to you, but feel free to jump in, Nina and Laura. You know, it really seems to be a moment where there's 1,000 flowers blooming at the same time.
Exactly right.
It's mushrooming all up. Can you see the forest through the trees? Does it still make sense to you in this context?
Yeah, actually, yeah. I think the greatest benefit, how can I say, to join in multiple initiatives is just 2 words. So it's mutual complementarities. So because of course, you know, it's very difficult. It's actually very difficult to think about what nature is now, and also how the nature will be in the future, because we don't have any kinds of common measurement like GHG emissions of atmosphere in climate change arena. So in this case, we need to take a more holistic and multidisciplinary approach for these nature issues. So let me take one example. So this is water issues. So if we think what is water issues, so we have to take care of, for example, water volume and also water drainage. But at the same time, we need to take care of contamination of water, or contamination of water like chemicals like PFAS and P4, which discussion is really now ongoing. So at the same time, we need to take care of water, what this water is for that. So for example, if we think about ultra pure water, so this should be used for semiconductors. And also, if we think the water with more potassium and calcium, but less iron. So Tim, do you know this water is for that?
I wish.
Sorry, this is a surprise question. So actually, so this water is for Japanese sake, so which you definitely should try it.
Then I should know this. Okay, that's good.
So that is why we need to take, how can I say, we need to think about a lot of things. So when we are facing on nature, so in this case, nature also this is really relatively new to our investment society. So that is why we have to join in multiple initiatives, and through actually participations, so we can accumulate our knowledge, especially comprehensive knowledge on nature, and at the same time, we can formulate our network with other colleagues, other professionals with technical expertise. So this is, I think, the greatest benefit for multiple initiatives. Thank you.
It would be funny to say that the greatest benefit of being part of multiple stewardship initiatives is the quality of Japanese sake, but I think your last point really drives it home. So thanks so much, Dai. Do you have anything that you would like to reflect on in this context?
Yeah, well, I think the fact that there are many initiatives in the market when it comes to stewardship around nature, it's beneficial because it really enables investors to select or prioritize which initiatives they want to join based on their own strategic preferences and how it aligns with their engagement agenda. But I think at the end of the day, and I was joking about this before the panel started, probably 3 years ago, we didn't have so many people joining a biodiversity panel. And now it's great to see that there are so many investors that are interested in this topic. And I think that's really the end goal that we're trying to do here, right? We're trying to push for a nature agenda and really knock on the doors of companies and also sovereigns to really make them realize how important it is to look at nature-related risks and opportunities. And that's really, I guess, the end goal of having so many initiatives related to this topic. Companies are starting to realize that they need to do more and that investors are asking more questions. So at the end of the day, I think it's a beneficial thing that we have so many opportunities.
I absolutely echo that it's beneficial that these initiatives are complementary. We need all of them. We learn from all of them. And at the same time, I said that before, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be involved in any of those. But there with like all of the collaboration comes also a lot of work. And everyone who is involved in a collaborative initiative knows about that. There's a lot of coordination going on with other investors, particularly if you lead on a company. You need to make sense of all the industry developments, of the initiatives developments, of then the investment-linked elements that you want to bring back to your organization, communicate internally and externally. So it's not to underestimate that effort, but it definitely makes sense and it's worthwhile. And we cherish all the work that is happening.
I think that's a really important point, right? It's the cost of action that I think you're really rightly pointing out. And as we have heard in other sessions as well, there's this cost of inaction, right? And I think this is a nice leeway into my next question. And Laura, I want to turn to you on this in terms of looking at it from a client perspective. So being active in these collaborative initiatives beyond the objective of working towards halting and reversing nature laws, sort of how does that then benefit your clients in the long run?
Yeah, I think there are 3 ways in which stewardship work related to nature can really spill over into benefit for our direct clients. So first is actually the business case around nature. And we heard that throughout the conference. Half of the world GDP is related to nature. We know that it can pose material risks to certain industries. So if we as investors are able to successfully engage and nudge companies to actually take a more proactive approach to their nature-related impacts and dependencies, then we're also managing the risks in our portfolios in a better way when it comes to transition and physical risks related to nature. So that's also part of our fiduciary duty. Then the second actual benefit for our clients relates to the impact that we might achieve on the ground through our engagement work. So at the end of the day, what we're asking companies to do, and also government, is to align with the global biodiversity framework and really reverse and mitigate nature loss by 2030. So if we are able to successfully engage with companies and really push them, for example, to tackle land use change, if that's one of the main impacts that they have on the drivers of biodiversity loss, by reducing deforestation, really committing to zero deforestation targets, and also starting to actively restore and conserve ecosystems, then we can also be aligned with that type of engagement outcomes that we achieve through those dialogues. And finally, I think the topic of regulation is also very important. So we see more regulators across the globe looking into biodiversity. So in Europe, we have SFDR, which asks investors to start disclosing the adverse impacts of their portfolios. And some indicators actually relate to biodiversity. And on top of that, we see more and more taxonomies looking into biodiversity and sort of expanding their classification of economic activities that can be linked to that topic. So if we manage to enhance the disclosures from the corporate side on biodiversity, then we're in a better position to comply with these regulatory requirements.
Yeah, it's okay.
Echoing everything that you just said, maybe just on the business case, I would expand that there are clear opportunities, and the more we know about the companies, how they are dealing with risk, we also know more about how they deal with the opportunities in turn, and that can then help us select companies in our portfolios that ultimately would benefit the clients' portfolios. And we do actually hear a lot more clients asking for biodiversity risks in our portfolios and also on around engagement activity. So that it is asset owners know about the topic and want to hear more from their asset managers.
Okay, just one thing to add. So the value actually for client brought by stewardship initiative, right? So in this case, let's say there is one client whose preference is really on environment. So in this case, if we have multiple and many initiatives on nature, so in this case, for client, it's very easier or much easier to understand so which asset management companies are engaging in these initiatives, in which initiatives, and what kinds of activities, engagement they are doing. So in this case, client can easily decide where to put their asset, especially in terms of nature. So this is my added.
Fantastic. And so we've touched on this a little bit, but maybe we can dive into, within a bit more detail, this question of potential synergies, right, of these different initiatives. So yes, it does take time and it takes effort, but there should be something that comes out of it as well, right? So I'm wondering if you could come up with a number of really concrete examples of how these synergies do play out through participation in multiple initiatives. Nina, do you want to reflect on that?
Yeah, and I can bring an example from Brazil, where clearly there are many biodiversity risks or nature loss risks that we see, particularly linked, of course, to soy and meat. And so there is an example of basically a three-step collaborative engagement initiative. They are independent, but they all work in a way together in that supply chain. So on one hand, there is the investor policy dialogue on deforestation, where with other investors, Robeco included, a trip was organized to Brazil to meet various government representatives, the Ministry of Environment, of Indigenous People, the central bank, to discuss deforestation risks and how the country is planning to manage these. At the same time, we are engaging also collaboratively, and some of that started with the PRI, Soft Commodities Working Group, soy traders, and Brazilian meat packers on risk mitigation, again, on deforestation policies, on traceability and transparency. And there you can already see if there is some government mandated work on that, of course, companies respond differently to that. And then there's value chain engagement. So where does this soy end up, apart from the cows that eat it? Where is it traded to? Where does the leather from the cow end up? And so 50% of the exported Brazilian leather is coming from these meat packers. That goes to the automobile industry, particularly in Europe. We were founding members of the investor group for a deforestation-free automotive industry, and so we engage car manufacturers around their sourcing practices around that. So you can basically see the whole value chain. And then I mentioned that before, there's engagement that is like, part of it has been done with IIGCC bank engagement, but also separately, individually, where we engage then financial institutions, in this case, mainly Brazilian banks, about their financing practices of the local meat packers, of the local soy producers, and how they incorporate deforestation risk practices in their financing practices to avoid risks there again. So it's a whole, like where we can really see there's a lot of collaboration going on. It's supplemented with one-on-one engagement, and it all tackles the same issue from a different angle, because it's not like one company cannot solve for it.
Anything to add, maybe?
Yeah, maybe I can share a bit more on the work we've been doing in IPDD with the Indonesian government, and how it created cross-pollination opportunities also with other initiatives on the corporate engagement side. So we've been engaging with different ministries and different stakeholders in Indonesia on the topic of deforestation and how the type of policies they push forward can really contribute to decrease the rate of land use change in the country. So last year, we actually traveled to Jakarta with Investor Group, and we actually signed a memorandum of understanding with the Indonesian Stock Exchange, where we've been collaborating very actively around the sustainability disclosures that the stock exchange is recommending listed companies to put forward, also in line with the regulatory requirements from different ministries. So we've been providing knowledge sharing sessions, also advocating for including more metrics around deforestation and nature-related topics. And we've also been incorporating those insights into the dialogue that we've been having with corporates in that market through different initiatives like FSTA. And another important topic that we discussed with the IPDD group is the development of the green taxonomy in Indonesia, and also how it looks at topics related to nature. And it's been very useful to bring back those conversations with the different ministries to the discussions with corporates, and also around how to potentially issue sustainability bonds or green bonds that are linked to the green taxonomy requirements in the future.
It's just one thing to add. Actually, we are also proactive to work with other initiatives, also at global level. For example, FAIRR, so as Max says, just 20 minutes ago. So in collaboration with FAIRR, we are conducting actually engagement with companies in order for them to restore biodiversity region in Indonesia. So yeah, there are a lot of things of engagement.
Fantastic. So I think we have quite some time now to go and address some of the questions from you. So some of the questions have come in through Slido. Please feel free to add more as you do. But I wanted to start with, I guess, a question that can be directed to all, touching on the gap between the amount spent currently on biodiversity conservation and the amounts that may be needed is quite large. So apart from mitigating risks through stewardship, for example, what else can investors do to help close this gap?
That's a big question and a good one. I think we see more and more companies looking into potential opportunities that they can derive from conserving certain landscapes. So we've seen companies exploring the option of potentially issuing green bonds that are linked to conservation efforts, or even looking at the opportunities related to the carbon markets and also the development of biodiversity credits as a way of getting the required funding to actually start amplifying even further the conservation efforts that they have in place.
Yeah, I think actually public money is very in short in order to fill gap, yes, for biodiversity issues. So in this case, public money with private sector mobilization is really in need. So in this case, investors should take should take care of our risk and opportunities for companies to address these issues. I think so.
Yeah, I do have a question for you, Nina. Actually, a question, but also a compliment. So it's a great example of engagement activities in Brazil that you outlined. What would a successful outcome of that type of engagement be for you?
Well, if you go through all the different parties, so we would see that the government basically issues very clear policies on how they want to avoid deforestation, how they support the meat packers or the soy traders or soy producers on traceability, how they support the enforcement of existing policies or then to be developed policies. I think that's a big issue that you do have certain guidelines and policies in place, but they are not actually enforced. So that would be that element on then the traders and meat packers, that they either establish zero deforestation policies, or when they have them in place, that they again enforce them, that they set targets with like credible timelines, and then report back on them. I stop there. But
great. The latest question that just came in is around the roles and responsibilities of board members being strengthened also in the TNFD framework, but there are concerns around the skills and the capacity of board members amid, their responsibilities to address various ESG issues. So, how do you see companies needing to tackle this problem, and perhaps also building on that, how your engagement can drive that?
Do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. So I think that's a valid question, and also it makes sense to some extent because this is an emerging topic that has been brought forward into corporate agendas in the last years. So I think it is a valid point that directors will need to, expand their skill set to be able to look at the nature-related risks and opportunities in a similar fashion that they do for other environmental topics like climate. I think it's a matter of time that that will end up becoming slightly more mainstream, especially for those sectors where we see nature being a very material risk for their business. And we've seen already some companies actually strengthening their boards and bringing even representatives with experience in the civil society or environmental groups to be actually part of the board, or also take a role as an advisory member to the executive team. So they are certainly looking into ways to bring that technical expertise into the organization, but of course it's going to take time to reach that level.
I mean, actually, when we look at the example of climate, we still don't really see it in boards. And I mean, there are movements towards that, and some companies do establish sustainability committees at board level. But a lot of companies still don't have that. They don't have a sustainability committee. They don't have expertise on climate. And that's potentially much easier to get than biodiversity, which is so diverse with its topics and themes to be tackled. And so actually starting the conversation at board level on how do you work with your executive management team on a biodiversity strategy, who is accountable within the board for that, providing training, establishing sustainability committees at the same level as an audit committee or so. Those are the first steps we would take to engage on that topic, but a long way to go.
Yeah, I think this question is very important issues because, as you know, TNFD was launched last week, 2 weeks ago, and compared with TCFD, TNFD has more weight on governance issues. So in this case, I think the skill matrix is really important, and to invite external advisor or external directors whose skills are really match with biodiversity and nature things. I think so.
Great. Many more questions coming in. Thanks so much for that. And I think, Nina, you mentioned opportunities alongside material risks. So the question is, where, in terms of geography or sector, do you see some of the greatest opportunities in this
Okay,
regard?
I need to think about that. Can you
Sure.
If anyone else has an immediate answer, but we can also move on to another question.
Maybe I can share my thoughts, and then Nina, if you want to jump in. But I think, for example, companies that are providing solutions to larger corporations that, for example, have a very large biodiversity footprint could really benefit from this trend. So here I'm thinking of companies, for example, on satellite imagery, or providing technology that helps other companies to better trace and monitor their supply chain. And now we see a lot of push for that with the EU deforestation regulation coming into play next year. So we see a lot of business opportunities related to how do we bring more transparency into supply chains to increase traceability and be able to see where that product comes from the point of origin, because that's what the regulation asks for. So that could be an example, but maybe other examples relate to companies that are providing solutions to minimize the impact that other companies can have on certain nature-related topics. So, for example, we know that 80% of water that is being used in industrial processes is actually dumped into rivers and freshwater sources without any type of filtering. So those companies that are able to provide solutions to improve the way that water is being managed, those could also benefit from better business opportunities in the future. Because at the end of the day, what the Global Biodiversity Framework is asking us to do is to go through this transition period whereby in 2030, we actually need to reverse and minimize nature loss. So any company that is actually working towards that goal and providing solutions and ways for other companies in the broader sectors to manage their biodiversity footprint, those could be interesting investment opportunities.
Then I mentioned at the beginning, and maybe on the dependencies. So when we look at the sectors and which are the main dependencies, so I mentioned food and beverage, utilities, and materials. And so the water element is a clear one. So and anything linked to surface water or groundwater, but then also flood and storm protection is something. And then in general, anything around climate regulation, so tech solutions, again, that is something that is a very clear opportunity. And then from the impact side, you have, again, water use, water pollution, soil pollution. There are topics that can be or need to be solved and addressed, and there are massive opportunities.
Moving on, I think we have a really interesting question here also in terms of transition plans. Mm-hmm. And so whether you believe that you might actually eventually expect companies to cover biodiversity and nature within their climate transition plans, or do you actually see an advantage in having separate plans or separate vehicles for companies to show how they will work towards their nature and biodiversity targets? Should it be all-encompassing, or should it be in parallel?
May I? Okay. Yeah. Actually, how can I say? In finally, we should combine and integrate both climate and nature on the one aspect. However, at first, it's very difficult for companies to take from the beginning. So it is important. Yes, it's actually related to last two questions. So we have to reskill and also in terms of internal management at the same time invite external advisors and directors, yes, to work on these issues.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, everyone. I think we've run out of time. Thank you so much for your questions. And please help me thank our great panelists.
Thank you.
Are we staying or are we leaving?
No, you can come down. We'll just have a few last words by Paul to close off the session. Thanks so much.
4 minutes and 9 seconds. We are nearly there. Thank you very much to Yamawaki-san, to Nina, Laura, and Tim for that fantastic panel. Also to Peter, Max, and Monica for their excellent elevator pitches earlier. At the PRI, we see our role as not only coordinating initiatives like Spring, but also amplifying the work of others and showcasing the initiatives that you can get involved in coordinated by other organizations. And we hope that came through in the session today. Just a few quick takeaways from me from that session. So the first thing is, I think it's clear the stewardship space for nature is complex, but not as complex as it may first appear. Most of these initiatives are very well connected and increasingly working closely with each other to have a unified position on the same topics. We are working to bring additionality and added value to investors participating in these initiatives. There are many roads that lead to Rome, and with the enormity of the challenge we have ahead of us, there's clearly a case for more than one initiative. It's hard work, but investors that participate in multiple initiatives are recognizing and really benefiting from the different initiatives that are out there. They're recognizing their value to their clients and to their long-term investment portfolios. And thirdly, pressure on investors to act in this area is growing, both in response to physical risks, the physical risks of ecosystem collapse, and the transition risk associated with increased efforts by regulators and others to try and make progress on that topic. The case for investor action is clear, and collaborative stewardship is an effective and efficient means for investors to act. So lastly, onto what we hope you can all do now. So first, at the PRI, we would very much encourage you to sign the investor statement for Spring. And on the slide, you'll find a very handy QR code where you can find more information about the statement and the broader initiative that will be launched later. You can find details of that and more via also the PRI collaboration platform, which is collaborate.unpri.org. Secondly, please do explore the initiatives of our partners. All of these initiatives have public websites. Most of them are also on the PRI collaboration platform. And in addition, we have the privilege of many of our colleagues being here in the room and at the conference today. We heard from Peter from IIGCC, but we've also got multiple people here from Ceres. We have Max and colleagues from FAIRR and Monica and many colleagues here from AIGCC as well. So please do reach out to them and make the most of us all being here today as well. And thirdly, I think the final thing to note is, it's clear this is a growing and urgent issue. So I'd encourage all of you to start thinking more about nature as part of your stewardship strategy and get involved in these initiatives today. That does draw our session to a close. So I want to thank again our wonderful panel and investor speakers, and to all of you for attending. Thank you very much.